Today I'm talking about a new camera that I'll be using for the channel, the Sony a6100. For over 4 years, I've been using the Sony a6300 as the workhorse of this channel, using it for talking portions of videos and for product shot B-roll. And I've just absolutely loved it. But recently I had some issues with the SD card slot where at first the card wouldn't go into the camera again. And then when I could get it go into the camera, it wouldn't recognize that an SD card was in there. I didn't really know how long it would take to fix or how much it would cost. So I started thinking, you know what, it's a 4-year-old camera anyway, let's talk about some replacements. And ultimately what I ended up deciding on was the Sony a6100 camera, which kind of seems like a step backward, but I did upgrade my glass by adding the Sigma 16mm 1.4 aperture lens, and it is an absolute beauty. Now it seems like a little bit of maybe not an upgrade, maybe a side grade. I think it's an upgrade, but I had been thinking about going for a much bigger upgrade, and ultimately I decided not to. But before I do get into more details on my thinking and my process, I do want to go over some disclosures. All of these cameras and all the lenses that we're going to talk about here were purchased with my own money. No one's providing them to me, no one's sponsoring this video, and no one's going to get a chance to preview any of my thoughts or footage before you guys get a chance to see this video on YouTube. It's my standard disclosure. Now, with the disclosures out of the way, let's talk about how I got to the Sony a6100. Now the Sony a6300 is actually an older camera. Sony's camera numbering system is all sorts of weird, but the Sony a6300 came out over 4 years ago now, and at the time it was, I think, cutting edge, and I think even today it still has fantastic specs. And technology wise, it wasn't limiting me in any way, and it was giving me pretty much everything that I wanted. It gave me 4K 30 frames per second for talking videos like this, although right now you're on a GoPro, and that's what I was using as I was kind of in between cameras. But for my talking portions of my videos, it would give me 4K at 30 frames per second, which I loved. And it also gave me 1080 footage at 120 frames per second, which I thought was really useful for shooting B-roll of all the shoes. That way I shoot it, I move my camera around. A lot of it's like handheld or on little mini roller skates / sliders, and then I slow it down to make it a little bit smoother. And so that was working out really well. I loved having both of those features available to me as a camera. On it, I would shoot with this 16mm pancake lens. It's an APS-C sensor, so there's a little bit of a crop factor. I think that means it comes to about 24mm equivalent. So not super wide, but a nice wide angle that I felt made it really nice and inviting. The other lenses that I was also using with it was the 30mm macro lens, which I thought was really useful for getting really close, especially on my longer term shoe reviews where I really wanted to get in to see like how was the shoe holding up, where was it wearing down, and what did that look like. I also had a 55 to 210mm lens that I used not very often, but it turned out to be very useful in certain instances, like when I go to races to spectate, like when I went down to Atlanta for the Marathon Olympic trials. It was an absolutely fantastic lens to have along with me there. So I was really happy with kind of what I had. I was very sad to see it go. So when I was looking to upgrade, I was looking at kind of two things. Like, I like the lenses that I have. I like the functionality that I have now, so I don't want to give up any of what I have already. It seems like a step backwards. But I also didn't spend a ton of money on lenses, so I felt like, you know, if I did need to switch, I could do that if 4 years later after my last major camera purchase, maybe there was new technology out there. So I started looking around, and I was looking originally for, well, you know what, I love 1080 at 120, but how about if I can make my entire video, not only the talking portion, like talking portions like this, in 4K, maybe I could do my B-roll of product shots in 4K as well. So I was looking at 4K 120 cameras that would be in like the range of cameras that I could kind of afford, even if they'd be a little expensive, and that I could also operate on a short like turnaround production schedule. And so I was looking at basically two cameras, the Canon R5, which was recently announced, and even the more recently announced Sony a7S III, both of which have 4K at 120 frames per second, which would give me wonderful slow motion opportunities, as well as good 4K shootings for talking portions like this. But those ended up being really expensive, and they're kind of like first gen of that caliber of camera having that type of feature in it. And I was like, it's kind of really expensive. I'm not sure that I need it. And ultimately, the running footage that I have, which I feel like is like the core of the B-roll footage that I have, more important than I would say the shoe product footage. The running footage is still only at 1080 because GoPros, like this GoPro, can shoot at 4K at 60 frames per second even, but it can't shoot at 4K 120. So at any event, I would still not have a complete 4K package. So then I thought, you know what, I like the 4K 60 because I actually had to use this GoPro camera to shoot a lot of B-roll footage for a couple of videos, and I thought it wasn't terrible. The GoPro camera doesn't really work great in the kind of lighting that I like to do for product shots, but it did a decent job. And so what if I took a camera that could do 4K and 60 frames per second and slow it down a little bit and see how that would work. So that put like the Canon R6, the Fuji X-T4, and even the GH5 in the mix as well. And a lot of the prices are a lot better there, and I'm still getting the ability to do 1080 at 120. So if I needed that, I'd also have that option as well. And those were all compelling. I'd have to switch lens systems for that. With the Fuji, I was worried about autofocus because I'm doing all this by myself. So like if I have to worry about babysitting autofocus, that's a real big concern. I just really like the APS-C sensor of the Sony. I've always liked this Sony system. I think it's really, the size is great, the functionality is great, and I really just kind of wanted to stay with it. So ultimately, I thought, you know what, maybe like I just don't need any of this. Maybe I'll wait for those really expensive cameras to get cheaper. As more and more cameras adopt that technology, it becomes cheaper over time, and maybe I'll just wait for that. So I thought maybe I'll just keep doing this. I feel like this is pretty good. I'm not having terrible problems with it. The B-roll was okay. I thought it was passable. So maybe I could live with that for like another year or so until some of that stuff gets cheaper. And then I was looking at the Sony a6400, which is the successor camera to this a6300. I was also looking at the a6600, which is kind of like the flagship of the a6000 series, which has a lot more features in it. And then I also kind of thought, well, what about this a6100? Because let's really look at what I'm using in the a6300, and more importantly, what am I not using? So some of the things that I wasn't using in the a6300 were the picture profiles that you could shoot in, which give you more dynamic range, but you also have to color grade. I don't have time to color grade, and I'm a little bit colorblind, so color grading is really hard for me to do anyway. So I just shoot normally in like the standard picture profile, and I kind of leave things in shutter priority for a lot of the shooting that I do. And I leave it at that because I have the pancake lens, which is fixed aperture. And I figured, you know what, if I don't need picture profiles, then I think I can just live with the Sony a6100. Plus I'm getting lots of benefits with it as well. Not only is it cheaper, the camera body itself was $700, so a lot cheaper than a lot of the other cameras I was looking at. I also finally get like a selfie flippy screen, which is pretty handy. I didn't really think it was that handy because I had an external monitor that I was using, but it's nice to not have to use the external monitor if I don't have to. So already I made a video with this camera yesterday. I was super happy with the results. It just shoots really beautiful images, and I've been really happy with it. The thing that I need to get used to is that it has an extremely shallow depth of field. So that makes for a beautiful kind of background blur, but it also makes for a lot harder product shots. So I think that I might still have this and bounce between this and the macro lens that I also have that I use to shoot some of my B-roll footage. So I'll still be able to use all the same lenses, and I also did have a lot of affiliate link money, like when I have links in the description down below that are to Amazon. It doesn't cost you guys anything, but I can get a commission if you guys buy through those things. And so I had several $100, enough to cover the cost of this lens. And it wasn't a cheap lens, much more expensive than I usually would spend on a lens, probably as much as all the other lenses I have combined. But I thought I would splurge on it because I'm not spending as much on a new camera. And it was a lot of your guys' advice that kind of helped talk me off the ledge of spending $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 on a camera. And I'm extremely happy with what I have for under $1,000. Still not a very cheap amount of money, but I feel like the image quality that I'm getting is, I really enjoy it. So thank you so much, everybody, for all of your helpful advice. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it all the way to the end of the video. Hopefully you guys are staying safe out there on your runs, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yo, what's going on?